Welcome to Crafting Your Next Move.
Welcome to Crafting Your Next Move with Lori Kraft, Associate Broker with the Kraft team of Origin Realty Group. Lori is a top producing Houston Realtor with more than 15 years of experience helping clients buy and sell homes across the greater Houston area. Known for her honest advice and boutique approach, she and her team combine cutting-edge marketing with good old-fashioned service to deliver results that speak for themselves. I'm LeAnn Lyon, and today we're talking about what actually happens after you accept an offer. The steps, the timelines, and the details that take a deal from contract to close. Hello, Lori. Great to see you.
How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. This is such a fascinating topic, and one I know you know especially well because you've done a few of these. So, Lori, once an offer is accepted, because you get a lot of accepted offers, how does the transaction shift from negotiation into execution? And what do you focus on first to keep things moving?
Well, the reality is the negotiation can go almost the extent of the deal, depending on how the deal is lined up. So, first of all, in Texas, it's a little bit different than many other states. We have what is known as an option period. We have 10 days, and that option, or it could be 5 days, or 3 days, or 12 days, or whatever you negotiate out. You pay for it. So, the buyer is paying for the right to terminate for any reason within that period. But that also period of time in which they need to do all their due diligence, aside from HOAs and survey and title and things of that nature. Those are all specifically spelled out in the contract. But for the most part, you better get it done in that whatever day you've allotted. So during that time is probably, in all honesty, the most anxiety producing period of time for the client, both seller and buyer, because the buyer doesn't want to spend all this money on appraisal because they pay that up front, whether that's happened yet. And they usually hold off on that until this period is done. But they have to pay for all of their inspections, usually multiple inspections. So they could be out several $1,000s at this point, plus whatever they paid for the option. So they don't want to be out that and then have to start all over again. So they get very nervous about it. The seller usually sits on pins and needles and they get very defensive because they're waiting for something major to come up and that for the buyer to try to get more money off or do whatever. So that part of the transaction is normally the most stressful. What I try to do is I set my sellers up for success. So I recommend that 2 to 3 days prior to going on market, they get a full AC checkup. You don't have to do an inspection, but you need a tune-up. You need to make sure everything's working and then get it in writing that everything's working. Because the most frequent thing to flag is going to be a temperature differential. Because on a two-story home, they're going to stand on the floor, they're going to shoot a gun at the vent clear at the top, and there's going to be a huge differential. And it may be cooling, but you got a whole lot of space to go to get to the cold air or the cold air to get to you. So that's one thing I do. I have them check their water heaters. I have them check their furnaces, make sure everything's in good working condition. And if you are concerned about your roof, go ahead and do that. Get that done and out of the way. So if those things do flag on inspection, you already have. Well, we already had that check. This is what we're saying. No, we're not paying for that because we have proof by someone who is more finely professional than the inspector. This is a unique specialist, and they say you're wrong. So it just sets them up for success. So that is one of the things that I do. But as far as negotiating down the road, you can get into things where appraisal is a problem. And that is consistently a problem recently. We had a whole period of time during COVID where appraisers took it upon themselves to try to keep the market down. Not their job. They're supposed to reflect the market, but it's an opinion. So they can make the numbers work to match their opinion of the property value. And they are a third party, independent party. They are not supposed to be influenced by buyer, seller, or who they work for, which is the bank. But they work their paycheck. They always work their paycheck. So they're going to err on. They don't usually want to blow up deals, though. So as an agent, like I've got one Monday, I have a packet. Now, the appraiser doesn't have to take it. They can leave it. but I'm going to put forth all the things my people have done to improve the property. The fact that they have a whole home generator, that adds value. How recently the roof was replaced, all those things go in my packet, along with all the comparables that I used support that offer price. And in this case, there were multiples. So I'm going to include all of the first page of those offers so he can see how high it went above market.
Wow. And this is, I know you said it's stressful for the buyers, it's stressful for the sellers, but this is where an experienced agent really shines because if you're not experienced, it's super stressful for an inexperienced agent as well. Am I right?
Absolutely. I had years ago, not that long ago, but maybe 5 years ago, I had a buyer's agent that did not want me to do an appraisal packet. She's like, "Oh, that's gonna upset the appraiser. You shouldn't do that. You're challenging his skill set." And I was like, "No, I'm justifying my price. You don't want me to do it because you want the appraisal to come in low, and then you have more room to negotiate. So, no, thank you. Not doing that."
Uh-huh.
Every
So, so you mentioned the option period is a key part of the contracts in Texas. So what decisions are being made during that window that can really affect the rest of the deal?
Well, it can be anything. And that's the thing that makes everybody nervous. So let's say that you're backing to green space, which people love backing to green space. If I'm representing buyer, what I'm going to be doing before they ever look at that property is I'm going to look at who owns that green space. Is that owned by the HOA? Because nothing's going there in all likelihood. You could put a water treatment facility there. The HOA could choose to do that, but it's not likely. It's usually green space that is preserved. Is it owned by the county? Nothing's going there if it's owned by the county. Is it owned by a private individual? That could be sold tomorrow and you could have a warehouse behind you because we have no zoning. So usually an agent will do that before you ever go look at it. But there's a lot of agents who don't for whatever reason, or they don't realize that there are future plans for a road to go in behind that house. And maybe it's not a minor one, maybe it's an extension of a major road. And the buyer will find out about this and then they want out. They're out. I had one that walked into a house when I was a newer agent, literally said, "Something is off. The house has bad mojo. Laura, you've got to get me out of this deal." And I'm like, "Well, if you lose your option fee, but I can get you out and you get your honest money back." But he like had a moment and the house didn't feel right. So that can happen. Other things that can happen during the option is things fall apart. Like you are walking the house and this happened to me on one. We went to do a final, well, not a final, we were meeting the inspector there. We get to the house and the ceiling is collapsed and water is running. And the water heater had exploded is what happened. But so you can have catastrophic events like that. And normally in Texas, though, the thing that ruins your deal is the inspection. You have inspectors that are very overzealous and will give an 80-page report, and it freaks out buyers. And they don't understand that caulk, while it can be important, I mean, exterior caulk, you don't want moisture intrusion. It's a maintenance issue. That is a handyman job. You're not going to blow up a deal over caulk. You're not going to, we've had paint differentials. I've had that a bunch in ceilings, especially where maybe a painter repainted the whole house and they missed a spot. And so you see a slight off color and it will flag as potential moisture that they can't pinpoint because it's not wet. So they want to know what it is. And your seller's like, "There's nothing." And the buyer's like, "I bet there's moisture there. I'll bet there was a leak," and they're hiding it. And it's just paint. But because it was planted in their brain, they can't let it go. And deals will blow up over stupid stuff like that.
Wow. Or, stupid stuff like frozen pipes. Whoops.
Yes.
That's been happening, unfortunately, which is
Yeah, and that's a whole different animal.
devastating. Totally.
That I could talk eons about that hazard because we do have coverage for that in the contract.
And another show, perhaps.
Exactly.
So, repair negotiations, speaking of which, can move a deal forward, or they obviously can create a lot of tension. So, how do you evaluate what's worth addressing versus what might not need to be revisited? You mentioned the caulk. Are there other things?
Well, what I usually tell my buyers is I say, "Okay, I want you to look at this. Do you love the house first?" And if they tell me we are in love with this house, then when we look at this inspection report, before it comes back, before you even go, What we are looking for is things that present a danger to person or danger to the property. Danger to person are things like wiring issues, maybe, mold. And mold that's a whole nother talk show because there's lots of levels to that. Usually can be treated and resolved, but people get very anxious about it. If you're in, certain areas, you can have radon. We don't have basements, obviously, because we hit water. So we don't have basements in Houston. But in other areas of the country, they do, and those kinds of things come up. So that would be danger to the person. Property is things like, is your water heater about ready to go? You just heard my story. Is there a foundation issue? Is there a framing issue? Maybe you're missing a truss in the attic. Believe it or not, happens more often than you want to know. They try to get a water heater in and somebody just cuts the truss out. And the seller has no idea that that's happened until they go up in the attic and they go, why is this piece of wood standing on my attic floor? And they don't, I'm going to say something that it's caught. But that would be a danger to the property. And if you try to focus on those issues, normally you can move a deal forward that's fair to everybody.
Well, financing timelines are not always visible to the seller. So, what signals do you watch for to confirm that a buyer's loan is progressing the way it really should?
Good lenders will check in with you. And if I haven't heard we're in the deal and I haven't heard from a lender, like I got one right now that's on my list to call tomorrow morning because I haven't heard anything from them since last week. And we're scheduled to close at the end of the month. I just want to make sure they're clearing all of their hurdles and the objectives are being taken care of. So, what I do on my side of it is I make sure I'm on top of that lender. And I don't want to be like, because then lender won't communicate with you. But I do want to make sure that everybody's on time. Now, is it always going to work out? No. I would love to tell every seller this is exactly when we're going to close because those of us in the industry, it's a contract. That is a contractual date. Unfortunately, there are lenders who see that as a target. That's a target date. And things do happen. And sellers have a tendency not to understand, but when things go into underwriting, things that were unknown to the buyer and unknown in the first round of digging will come up. What is often like a little thing that happens is if they were married prior, an old, you know, charge off for an ex spouse may pop up and they have to clear it. So those things can happen. Medical bills that you thought were written off will come up and they may not be able to see that.
Yeah. And so that kind of ties into this last question with this series is the a title work. Title work is kind of mysterious for a lot of people, and yet it runs parallel with everything else. So, what kind of issues can really surface there, and how do you address them before they slow things down?
Sometimes you can't. But title work is about making sure that the chain is clear. And you have to remember, title is insurance. It's a title insurance. So they want to make sure that they're insuring the chain. That's what they're trying to do and make sure there's nobody that can come after this property. That's what they're looking for. So when I get a property that I'm a little concerned about the chain, so it's inherited property, or there was a divorce, or there's some issues, I'll open title before we even list the property. Now, that means that the buyer's kind of stuck with our title unless they want to start all over, and I would not recommend that. And I usually explain we've got a POA involved, or this is an estate, or whatever. And the other agents are usually very understanding of that. So we open title. So before we even list it, we know if there's any clouds, and we do whatever we can to cure them before we're on market.
Can you share an example where something unexpected came up between contract and closing and how you worked through it to keep the deal intact? I mean, you've shared several today, but one juicy.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a juicy one. And hopefully this never happens to anybody. I had one that I took on knowing we were about to be we were already starting to need to be a short sale. I knew there were issues. There was some domestic abuse involved, so I was dealing with the wife but the husband would come in and sabotage things. So this was a battle already. I was told initially that they were 3 months behind. 3 months, you can do a short sale. So I knew enough about short sales and foreclosures to check both sides of that transaction. So I made sure that we had the short sale, and I knew they were already on foreclosure track. Before I listed it, I'd already checked with the bank. I talked to everybody and their brother. And so I knew that unbeknownst to the seller, they were already in the foreclosure train. So they were not 4 months behind. They were 6 months behind. And the HOA was 3 years past due. So everybody was trying to get to the property. So by the time I figured all that out, we were on market. We found a very viable, what is told me was a very viable buyer. I had checked with the lender. I was getting check-ins every week. Everybody was on the same page. Agent she was a newer agent, but she was working under a brokerage that I knew the owner of the brokerage and I knew the broker. So I felt pretty confident about her. Well, a week before we were to close, I was already getting rumblings from the bank that we needed to wrap this up quickly, or they were going to start pushing, which meant they went to law. The agent on the other side called me in a panic and said, "I can't put the lender loose." I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" So I was calling, no response. Called the broker of record. She started calling, no response. So I said, I need to do a second look lender on this. And at the time, that wasn't really vogue. Now we do that a lot more. So I called one of my Hispanic speaking lenders. He ran it and called me, "Lori, these people are not qualified to buy a box of sticks." I don't know who qualified. They cannot buy this much. They have too much debt. They don't have any income. He just lost his job. I'm like, so I said, "I need you to terminate." And then she wanted to understand the I'm like, "You're not getting in your own story. You're going to terminate. We're going to get this moving. You're going to explain to your clients why we cannot move forward. And I got to go find another buyer in a week." So I was on the phone with everybody I knew that could possibly have an investment client. Found one, all cash, closed in 7 days, right before the bank picked me up.
Wow.
That was a miracle. Because I'm not sure how else that came across.
Wow, that is quite the story. So, as we wrap up today's episode, and as you are getting closer to those closings, how do you prepare your sellers so that they understand exactly what's coming next and don't feel so rushed at that
Well,
finish line?
I usually give them a book ahead of time, but then they forget. So I try to send out emails again. I try to check in on Mondays and then again on Fridays. So if I know we're closing this week, 2 weeks before, I'm going to say, make sure you remember to turn off your utilities the day after, because it has to be through the day of closing. Don't turn it off the day of, because if they turn off at 8 a.m., they can't do their walkthrough, and then you're host. So day after, I remind them all the things that need to be moved, like, the forwarding address, stuff like that. This is a biggie. Always make sure they have a valid ID. I got caught on that on one that the license had expired. They didn't think anything of it. He was 98. He didn't care. Couldn't close. We had to delay closing by a day. So those kinds of things you want to remind them of. Make sure that if they're going to need a mobile notary, that you're going to send that to wherever. You want to get everything buttoned up, and you start that process about 2 weeks before the closing.
Excellent. Well, that is it for today's episode of Crafting Your Next Move. If you're thinking about selling in Cypress, Tomball, or anywhere in the Houston area, visit craftrealtyteam.com to learn more or connect directly with Lori's team. And remember to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review or even share it if you found this episode especially helpful. Thank you, Lori.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.